Sirens have been wailing across Tel Aviv for 20 consecutive hours. Not the brief alerts that Israelis have learned to live with. Continuous, overlapping, wall-to-wall sirens. And behind them, a question that the official statements from Washington, Jerusalem, and Tehran are all deliberately avoiding. When the interceptors run out, what happens next? Because that is the real story behind the fourth wave. Not the missiles in the air, the missiles left in the magazine. On the morning of February 28, 2026, the United States and Israel launched the largest coordinated military strike in the modern history of the Middle East. American carrier strike groups in the Arabian Sea and Israeli. A-35 Adir stealth fighters operating out of the Negev coordinated over a shared target list that included Iran's Islamic Revolutionary Guard Corps command facilities, its air defense networks, its missile production infrastructure, and, in a strike that changed the strategic logic of everything that followed, the residence of Supreme Leader Ali Khamenei himself. That strike was confirmed. Khamenei is dead. Iran has declared 40 days of mourning. And the Islamic Revolutionary Guard Corps, operating now without its supreme commander, has launched 4 consecutive waves of ballistic missiles and drone swarms at Israel and at every U.S. military installation across the Persian Gulf. The fourth wave is underway as this analysis begins. But there is a variable in this exchange that no mainstream source has stopped long enough to explain. And it is the one that determines whether Israel and the United States can hold what they started. Here is where the official narrative ends and the real strategic picture begins. The variable that every analyst was warning about before a single missile was launched on February 28th is not the number of Iranian missiles in flight. It is the number of American interceptors left to stop them. During the 12-day war in June 2025, United States forces fired somewhere between 100 and 150 terminal high-altitude area defense interceptors, each one costing an estimated $12.7 million, to help shoot down approximately 500 Iranian missiles aimed at Israel. By October 2025, European intelligence sources had already confirmed that U.S. interceptor stockpiles were severely depleted. Pentagon procurement plans filed before this operation called for the purchase of just 37 terminal high-altitude area defense interceptors in 2026. 37. In the last exchange, American systems expended over 100. That gap has never been closed, and Iran's planners knew exactly how wide it was. The Islamic Revolutionary Guard Corps' doctrine for the fourth wave was not designed to destroy Israel in a single salvo. It was designed to drain. Saturation doctrine. First wave floods the radar with drones. Second wave exhausts the lower-tier interceptors. Third and fourth waves target the gaps that the first two created. The Islamic Revolutionary Guard Corps named this operation True Promise 4, and its official statement was precise. It was carried out with missiles more advanced than those used in any previous operation, with greater precision and ferocity. They were not describing the quantity of what was launched. They were describing the quality of what remained after the defense systems had already been pushed to their limit. That quality distinction is where the mainstream coverage has stopped thinking. Because on March 1st, 2026, Iran did something no military analyst had publicly confirmed it had done before. It deployed the Fatah-2. To understand what that means, you have to go back to what the Fatah-1 did in the last war. In June 2025, during Operation True Promise 3, the Islamic Revolutionary Guard Corps released footage of Fatah ballistic missiles closing on Israeli targets. The Iron Dome air defense system, which was designed for short-range rockets and artillery, had an interception rate of roughly 20 to 30% against these ballistic threats. Not 95%, 20 to 30. The Arrow 3 and David's sling systems were the real workhorses. But even those systems depend on a predictable ballistic arc. The missile goes up, follows a calculated trajectory, comes down, and the interceptor meets it at a defined interception window. The Fatah-2 does not follow that arc. It carries what is classified as a hypersonic glide vehicle. Once the first stage burns out, the second stage maneuvers. It pitches, it yaws, it approaches from directions that a system computing a ballistic solution cannot anticipate. One defense analyst described the problem precisely. To intercept an object moving at Mach 10, you would need a defense system moving at Mach 30. That is physically impossible in the atmosphere. And as of this morning, Iran has reportedly deployed this system in combat for the first time, targeting United States military assets in the Gulf region, not Israeli territory. The signal being sent is deliberate. The message is, we have moved beyond what your defense architecture was designed to handle. Now understand the timeline that made February 28th possible, because this did not happen without warning. It happened because every warning was absorbed and then overridden by a strategic calculation that neither side was willing to walk away from. The diplomatic timeline ended on February 18th, 2026. Indirect nuclear talks between Washington and Tehran, mediated by Oman, were held in Geneva. Iranian Foreign Minister Araghchi described them as producing good progress on guiding principles. American negotiators left with an irreconcilable core demand. Iran would not enrich uranium on its own soil. Tehran refused categorically. That refusal was the last decision in a sequence that made the military operation inevitable from the American side. At that point, two United States carrier strike groups, the Abraham Lincoln and the Gerald R. Ford, were already converging on the Persian Gulf. A senior Trump administration advisor had placed the probability of kinetic military action at 90% within weeks. Secretary of State Rubio had scheduled a meeting with Prime Minister Netanyahu on February 28th to discuss Iran. That meeting never happened. The operation happened instead. At approximately 8:14 in the morning Israel time on February 28th, the Israeli Defense Forces issued their first public alert. The initial statement was careful. There is currently no need to stay inside protected spaces. That language lasted 90 minutes. By 10 in the morning, the Islamic Revolutionary Guard Corps had announced the first wave of Operation True Promise 4. Ballistic missiles were in the air over every major Israeli population center simultaneously. The sirens in Tel Aviv, the Galilee, Jerusalem, the Sharon region, and the Shvela, all activated within the same 3-minute window. Israel's layered air defense architecture, Arrow 3 at the top tier intercepting long-range ballistic threats, David's Sling in the middle tier, Iron Dome for shorter-range threats, activated in full. And the United States Aegis ballistic missile defense system on Arleigh Burke-class destroyers in the Mediterranean and Arabian Sea began firing SM-3 and SM-6 interceptors against the incoming salvo. The defense held. That is the official statement. But holding is a spectrum, and what the fourth wave reveals is where the edge of that spectrum is. A confirmed Iranian missile struck a 9-story building in northern Israel during the first wave. A woman was killed in the Tel Aviv metropolitan area, the first civilian confirmed dead on the Israeli side. Haifa, home to Israel's main naval base and critical oil refinery infrastructure at Haifa Bay, sustained confirmed impacts. The Ramat David Air Base was designated as a target in the third and fourth waves. The Islamic Revolutionary Guard Corps also named the Israeli Ministry of Defense compound in the Hakiria district of Tel Aviv, the Beit Shemesh Military-Industrial Complex, and the Ishtad Military Industries Center. These are not symbolic targets chosen for deterrent messaging. These are the specific facilities that enable Israel to conduct sustained military operations. The Islamic Revolutionary Guard Corps was not trying to shock the Israeli public. It was targeting the industrial and command infrastructure that makes continued strikes on Iran possible. That interception rate of 85 to 95% that the Israeli Defense Forces are reporting is a real number. But it contains a critical omission. 95% of 200 incoming missiles means 10 missiles reach their targets. Against the right targets, 10 is not an acceptable marginal margin. And the Islamic Revolutionary Guard Corps can read that mathematics as clearly as any Israeli defense planner. Drop your analysis in the comments. Where do you think the interception rate holds on a fifth wave? And at what point does it break? The physical battle over Tel Aviv is the visible layer of this exchange. The layer that will determine the outcome is not visible from any satellite image currently available. It is the economic and strategic architecture that was already shifting before the first missile launched, and has been accelerating every hour since. The Strait of Hormuz is, as of this morning, functionally closed. Iranian state media described it as practically shut. Ships reported receiving very high-frequency radio transmissions purportedly from the Islamic Revolutionary Guard Corps Navy, announcing that transit through the waterway is banned. Dozens of crude oil tankers that were approaching the strait have turned around. Container ships carrying everything from electronics to furniture have paused or reversed course. No formal announcement has been made by Tehran, but the operational reality on the water is already in effect. The market's reading is not ambiguous. JP Morgan estimates that a sustained Hormuz closure pushes oil prices to between $120 and $130 per barrel. Energy analysts at Kepler are more direct. They called it a guaranteed global recession if the closure holds beyond 72 hours. That number, 20% of all seaborne oil and 20% of global liquefied natural gas supply, is a figure that reaches directly into fuel prices, inflation calculations, and interest rate decisions in Washington, London, Frankfurt, and Tokyo. 3/4 of the oil transiting Hormuz goes to China, India, Japan, and South Korea. China receives half of its crude imports through that strait. And Beijing has already signaled its position in language that has received almost no analysis in Western coverage. Chinese state channels broadcast a warning that if US or Israeli attacks continue, China will halt all rare earth mineral exports to the United States, a category of material that includes elements critical to the production of missile guidance systems, fighter aircraft components, and semiconductor manufacturing. The rare earth warning has not been officially confirmed by the Ministry of Foreign Affairs, but its appearance across state-adjacent channels at precisely this moment is not coincidental. China is positioning publicly in the strategic frame without formally entering the military one. Russia condemned the US and Israeli strikes as pre-planned aggression. The Gulf states, Saudi Arabia, Qatar, the UAE, Kuwait, Bahrain, were themselves struck by Iranian missiles during the retaliatory waves. Qatar confirmed 2 waves of attacks on its territory. The UAE confirmed an Iranian missile struck near Abu Dhabi, killing 1 person and causing fires at Jebel Ali port and a hotel in Dubai. Saudi Arabia said it repelled Iranian strikes on its capital and eastern region. These are not Iran's allies being pressured. They are countries that were just attacked by Iran in retaliation for a war that began with an American and Israeli decision. That strategic reality is the most analytically significant development that mainstream coverage has not adequately framed. The Gulf states have been simultaneously drawn into the conflict as targets and positioned as the only regional actors with pipeline bypass capacity to partially offset a Hormuz closure. The UAE's Habshan-Fujairah pipeline and Saudi Arabia's cross-country pipeline together have a combined bypass capacity of approximately 4.6 million barrels per day. Against 20 million barrels per day of normal Hormuz throughput, that leaves a gap of roughly 15.5 million barrels per day. Every day that gap holds, it is a gap that global energy markets are pricing into every financial decision made anywhere in the developed world. For the 4 million people living in the greater Tel Aviv metropolitan area, the strategic frame offers no practical comfort. Families who spent February 28th and March 1st cycling between their homes and the nearest shelter room have been doing so with no clear sense of how many more waves are coming, how long the defense holds, or what arrives if it does not. In the southern Iranian province of Hormozgan, an Israeli strike on an elementary school in the city of Minab killed at least 51 people. Iranian state media has reported the death toll rising above 80. These are children. Whatever the military logic of the surrounding operation, this is the human layer that the strategic frame cannot contain and cannot erase. If you want the analysis when the 5th wave begins, and everything in Iran's doctrine says it will, subscribe and turn on notifications. Three variables will determine how this ends. The first is the interceptor inventory. If the United States is genuinely at the limit of its available terminal high-altitude area defense and Aegis SM-3 stockpile, and all available evidence from pre-strike reporting suggests it is closer to that limit than any official is willing to state publicly, then the fifth and sixth waves of Operation True Promise 4 will find a defense architecture operating at reduced capacity. The second variable is Iran's new leadership. Khamenei is dead. The Islamic Revolutionary Guard Corps is operating with what analysts are describing as shorter command latency than in the 12-day war, suggesting a pre-delegated authority structure that was already in place before the strikes began. Whoever holds authority in Tehran right now is making decisions under conditions of unprecedented internal pressure. A government that has just lost its supreme leader and absorbed the largest military strike in its history has two possible strategic paths: accept a negotiated pause and signal strength through discipline, or escalate to the Fatah II arsenal and the Hormuz closure simultaneously, framing both as the fulfillment of a promise that predates February 28th. The third variable is oil. At $130 per barrel, the domestic political calculus inside the Trump administration changes. American voters feel oil in a way they do not feel missile interception rates. The economic clock that started when the first tanker turned around in the Strait of Hormuz is running in parallel with every military decision being made in Washington and Jerusalem. The most likely scenario is a negotiated pause within 48 to 72 hours, brokered through channels that are already open. Oman has not closed its diplomatic lines, and both Beijing and Moscow have an economic interest in halting a Hormuz disruption that damages their own energy supply chains as much as anyone else. The most dangerous scenario is that Iran's new command authority, under pressure to demonstrate continuity and resolve after Khamenei's killing, escalates rather than pauses, deploying the Fatah II inventory systematically against depleted U.S. defense assets, while simultaneously making the Hormuz closure formal and permanent until a full ceasefire is reached. The decision point that separates those two outcomes is not a military threshold. It is a political one. It is the moment when whoever is now authorizing launches in Tehran asks a question that no missile can answer. Is continued escalation a path to survival or the end of it? The missiles over Tel Aviv have not stopped. The interceptors are finite. The Strait of Hormuz is, for the first time in its recorded history as a modern energy corridor, functionally dark. And the decision that determines whether this remains a bilateral military exchange or becomes the conflict that rewrites the strategic architecture of the entire region, that decision is being made right now in a command structure that lost its supreme leader 24 hours ago. What happens next has never happened before. That is not a reason for certainty. It is a reason for precision.